Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
He is Dr. Austin Crowe, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine this morning. Got to be feeling good, Doc. Got Texas tonight. You got your Vikings coming up in a couple days. Happy Football Friday, man.
It's a great day to be alive.
Yeah, we're gonna get your picks for your Longhorns and your Vikings coming up here in just a bit, man. But I want to start it off with Christian Watson. I know you and I were kind of texting a little bit about it when it happened and such, but it seemed like that typical ACL injury. He's running a route and all of a sudden just falls to the ground and in pain there. And the thing I wanted to ask you was, there was one report that, obviously he suffered an ACL, but one report said he also suffered some other damage, and they didn't quite say what that was. What would be some other possibilities that could be other damage to that knee outside the ACL?
Yeah, there's three that really come into play. One would be another ligament, and generally speaking, an isolated injury like this, you're not going to see an associated ligament injury with it, so it'll be an isolated ACL tear. But you could have like an MCL, LCL, PCL, but again, the mechanism for that just doesn't add up. Those are usually much more violent injuries. Or like someone jumps and lands and then he really buckles hard underneath them. So I'd say that one's pretty unlikely. The other two are much more prevalent. One would be meniscus injury. And so, when you see that injury happen, it looks innocent enough. We've all known to acknowledge when we see a non-contact injury in the field, it's significant. But still, you look at it and you say, that's not that bad. But the thing to remember is when the ACL tears, the knee does a really violent shift, and it's you can't see it to the naked eye, but we can see it very clearly in the MRI. And I talk to this with every one of my patients that tears their ACL. There's a very classic bone bruise pattern where basically the tibia shifts forward, and you get this really big bone bruise. So the back of the tibia hits the front of the femur. So if you think about that for a second, there's a split second where your shin bone is sitting all the way in the front of the knee. So it goes quick, but most people who tear their ACL remember that feeling, and bam, there it goes. So point being, with that, there's often a significant impact to the meniscus in the back. So tears in the menisci are very common with ACL tears, probably about half the time or so. And then lastly, and this is the one you hope it's not, is there's cartilage injury. Mm-hmm. So with that same exact mechanism I described, in addition to kind of pinching the meniscus and tearing that, you can get really significant impaction or shearing injuries to the cartilage surface. So they can be small, they can be big. And so that's the one that really, when we look at MRI, that's one we're always kind of keeping our eyes peeled for, because that's a bigger problem, because it's often hard to address in the long term. So I did kind of a little bit of a deep dive. I didn't see any other reports indicating what it was. So who knows exactly what it could be. Sometimes people even say, the bone bruises are another injury. That's like every ACL tear ever. So who knows what it is, but there's been no other disclosure of what that would be. But if I'm betting, ACL, maybe with a meniscus, maybe with a small cartilage injury, but I wouldn't guess much beyond that based on the mechanism.
So I want to go back, because I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I think for a lot of us, like for me and just the average Joe out there, we're watching it, it's like he was running and all of a sudden he just went down. How does he tear his ACL? So kind of what you were just mentioning, there is that violent shift that is not seen to the naked eye. So something, whether he was like stopping that route and going, that resulted in his knee making that violent shift to tear his ACL then?
Yep, yeah, exactly. So generally speaking, the mechanism is actually fairly universal. What happens is there's a load and a rotational force to the knee. The knee will buckle in slightly, so we call that valgus, and it creates what we call dynamic valgus force. So the knee drops in and rotates, and that rotational force goes into the ACL, and 99.9999% of the time your ACL is like, I got it. But then that one time it's not, the ACL tears. And so when there's all that force loaded and the ACL lets go, then the knee shifts really hard, and that's when the injury occurs. Well, obviously the tear is the beginning of the injury, but then there's the secondary injuries with that. So it's really quite impressive what we see on MRIs. It really shows you, and I think it really kind of puts a much clearer picture to the patient. Is like, look, this is a pretty violent injury, and often it seems benign enough. Whether it's a basketball player jumping and kind of landing or a football player cutting on the field, it doesn't look that bad. But again, what happens to the knee, his likely he was making a cut or at least a juke, and he was basically trying to turn his whole body weight in that knee, and then pop, there it goes, and then boom, in that split second, there's a lot of energy that goes right through that knee.
Mm-hmm. And you got to wonder, too, with this late in the season, how much it's probably going to knock him out a big chunk of next season, I would imagine, too.
You would be correct. Yeah, it'll be, and it does depend on the other injuries along with it, but I can tell you it's very unlikely he'll start the season.
Mm-hmm.
I do think, at some point he will be able to rejoin, but, it's really, the pendulum has kind of swung back and forth on that. I mean, there was, a decade or two ago, there was a push to try to get people back quickly after ACLs. And there's always a desire for that, don't get me wrong. I mean, patients are always like, when can I come back? I mean, that's the first question, understandably. But we learned that going back early has some serious drawbacks. So the pendulum has kind of swung a little bit the other way, where now people are waiting a little bit longer. I think you really need to treat it individually, and that's how I approach it with my patients. And it's a discussion, and there's a lot of variables that go into it. But I mean, we do know that going back earlier than 6 months is a very, very high instance of re-tearing. But still, some people at that 6 month mark, their leg still has significant weakness. And you're looking at more like 9 months, and then a year is not uncommon either. So, I mean, between 6 months and a year is average. And that's obviously it's a huge window, but you need to take it on a case-by-case basis. But, I mean, nothing I can tell you is more devastating than someone doing all that rehab and then re-tearing their ACL. It's a tough thing. So you want to make sure they're ready to go.
And I know we've mentioned this one before, too, but like Adrian Peterson's not the norm. His recovery time when he tore that ACL. I mean, is that
oh my God,
is that genetics? Do you know if he did anything to do it, or was that, everybody heals differently, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in that. I mean, I think, yes, I mean, he's built different, right? I mean, Adrian Peterson was, a freak among freaks, right? I mean, what he did, you go back and watch clips of him, and I kind of forget how good he was. In his heyday, he was an absolute beast. But, I mean, he came back, just to let everyone recall, I mean, he came back from ACL and won an MVP that next year.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just...
And he tore it like the last week or last 2 weeks of the season. So.
Yeah, it was, against the Redskins. Yeah, I remember it very, very well, unfortunately. So, I mean, to do that, unreal. So one of my friends was actually in on his surgery. He was in the James Andrews Fellowship, and so I know during rehab, I mean, he was going beyond what he was supposed to do for a lot of his rehab, which I do not recommend people do that. I mean, there are people out there that want to, push it beyond, but the recovery that we have for these athletes is there for a reason. So guys who go above and beyond, it's a risky game to play, but he did that, and it paid off for him. But I mean, again, if he would have retore it, that could have been the end of his career right then and there. So it's certainly not worth it, in my opinion. But he went, and pushed his body to the limit, and again, he's certainly built different than the average Joe. There's no question about that one.
Yeah. Elbow gate going on in Green Bay right now. I know you and I were talking a little bit about it the other day. Well, that gamesmanship maybe has kind of been put to rest after Jordan Love was listed as a full participant yesterday. But his presser on Wednesday, or his media availability is probably the best way to say it, on Wednesday, I mean, he was very short with his answers. And when he was asked, does it hurt when you throw, he says it hurts in the elbow, but he can grip the football there. So I guess my question is, we've all hit our funny bone. I've never hit it so hard to where I can't grip something, though, so I can't imagine what that feeling's like. But is that just, when he says it hurts in his elbow, is that bruising that's going on in there? Could it be something else that's going on in there? And how much of an effect do you think that could be coming up this weekend?
Yeah, so to answer a couple of those things. So it's, your funny bone is your ulnar nerve, right? So, kind of the joke, it's not so funny when you hit it, but I mean, it's right there. It is protected by two bones. It sits, the olecranon is kind of the tip of your elbow, and then what's called the medial epicondyle. It sits right in that groove behind there called the cubital tunnel. So it's protected, but it's not perfect, right? We've all hit the funny bone. And, I saw the clip of him hitting it. I can promise you it's nothing other than that. Now, that being said, if you hit a nerve hard enough, you can develop something called a neuropraxia. So neuropraxia, think of it like a concussion for your nerve. So you can hit a nerve, and that's really what a mild neuropraxia is. When you hit your funny bone, then it tingles into your pinky and ring finger, and it's like a mild version of it. It stings for a second, goes away, you're good. If you hit it hard enough, it can go where the nerve stops working for a little bit. Now, you can have really extreme versions of that where the nerve is shut off. So let's say we do surgery on an elbow and we have to dissect the full nerve out. That irritation of the nerve, people can wake up from surgery and the nerve does not work. Now, we didn't cut the nerve will fully wake up, but that trauma to it caused it to shut off for a little bit, again, a temporary neuropraxia. So that those nerve palsies, it could be the point where it doesn't work. Now, he clearly was able to, move his hand and do things, so we know it wasn't a complete nerve. So the ulnar nerve goes down and it does sensation to the pinky ring. That doesn't matter so much. It also goes to all the intrinsic muscles of the hand. And so that will have a big role in your grip. So if he wasn't able to grip a ball, that would certainly play a role. So if he had enough of a nerve injury, it could theoretically do that. Do I think that's likely? No. Do I think that that's something that's going to irritate him? Perhaps. But I think the function's probably there. So now to take it a step backwards, the impact can cause irritation there, which we call a neuritis, so inflammation of the nerve. So that can ache. So you can get that aching in the elbow after you hit it. So my guess is this will bother him a little bit. It shouldn't affect his performance or function. So I don't think it'll be a huge deal, but you hit it hard enough to irritate the nerve to that point. It could be a factor, but I think it's unlikely.
Would that be something similar a couple of years ago when Brock Purdy had that elbow issue and he couldn't throw, in that NFC Championship game? He had to go out there and pretty much just hand the ball off every time to Christian McCaffrey against the Eagles.
That was his UCL.
Okay.
So if you remember, he ended up going on the Tommy John. So he ended up going on to a UCL repair procedure. Although that being said, it's not uncommon for UCLs to have some ulnar nerve issues with them, because when you injure the UCL, it opens up and creates a valgus on the elbow, so it stretches that nerve. So that can happen. So it could have been in conjunction with it, but his injury ended up being UCL because he ended up that offseason went on to have surgery on it.
Interesting. I want to move over to hoops here quick before we let you go here in a couple minutes. So Bucks player Chris Middleton, obviously he's been going through some health and some injuries and, coming back a couple months ago from 2 ankle surgeries in the offseason on both ankles there. They moved him back to the bench, and what Doc Rivers said was that the ankles aren't quite to where we want them. The recovery's not quite where we want them to go, so they're cutting back on his minutes, and he's been dealing with some tendonitis in those ankles. My question, I guess, is the fact that he's had surgery on both of these ankles, is this tendonitis going to be something that you think, given his age and such, that he might have to work through or deal with for the rest of his career?
The answer is potentially. Without knowing exactly, because they never really disclosed what he had done. Generally when athletes have ankle surgeries, there's going to be one of two things. A scope to kind of clean up some debris that's in there, or maybe a loose piece, a bone chip, that type of thing. Or it's to stabilize the ankle, so it's called a Brostrom procedure. So, people have recurrent ankle sprains, sometimes we have to tighten those up. Additionally, with recurrent ankle sprains or instability, you can develop issues with the outer tendons called the perineal tendon. So perineal tendonitis is very common when people have ankle issues. So the question is did he just have a cleanup scope even though he has instability and they were just hoping to do a smaller surgery and he just still has some instability and that's causing perineal tendon problems? Maybe. Did they do a procedure? No. Sometimes they'll actually even have surgery on the tendons themselves. That could be part of the surgery, is they'll do a debridement or repair those tendons. So it's obviously, without knowing, there's a lot of variables at play, but I can tell you people with these ankle issues, it can be recurrent. And I mean, he's been out a while, right? I mean, it has been a run. I mean, and the funny part is it's kind of been really cards tight to the chest. They really haven't disclosed what's going on. It's kind of just been like, wait and see, and everyone's been in the dark. So it is going to be a big question mark as to where it goes. But certainly with this and the timeline and the recurrence, I would absolutely be concerned that this could be a problem that could continue to rear its ugly head. But is it also possible that this is still just recovery from the surgery that included tendon work and it's part of the recovery process? That's also possible as well. So it could go either way, but I at least have some concern for sure.
Interesting. All right, your Longhorns are in action tonight, going up against Ohio State. How do you see Tech? Can they pull it off tonight? Is that what you're going to pick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a homer, so I got to go with my guys. Ohio State, the first half they played against Oregon, it's like no one can beat these guys. I mean, it was unreal. And that's kind of the Ohio State people are expecting all season long, and they finally showed up. So, I mean, if they come out, that being said, I believe Texas has the best defense in college football. So, they're best against our best. So, I think it will be a reasonably high-scoring game. I think it'll be probably, somewhere in the upper 20s, 30s as a winning score. So I think Texas can pull it out. I mean, Ewers is certainly had some clutch plays against Arizona State. That fourth down play was just phenomenal to put him here. So I think it'll be a close game. I wouldn't bet all my money on it, but I think Texas can pull it out. But Ohio State certainly is playing at a high level. Maybe 35-31, something like that. Win for Texas. We'll throw that out there.
All right, and then your Vikings Monday night. It's going to be in Arizona after the NFL moved it because of the fires in Los Angeles. we had before that game, I know our good buddy Brandon, who we'll talk to here in a minute, the one game one team he didn't maybe want to go up against was the Rams. Now you guys got the Rams. Are you a little bit nervous with this matchup, or are you confident?
For sure nervous. I mean, it's a road game, I guess, in name only right now. Although LA's never been a great home field advantage for the Rams. That's just teams travel well against them just because it's not their real home base, if you will. So that being said, I mean, Stafford is a veteran who's seen it all, done it all. Puka and Cooper, elite receivers. Our defense, our secondary is not our strong suit. Our pass rush has been a little bit lackluster the last couple weeks. So, yes, I think there's some matchup issues. I do believe if Darnold has a good game, our offense can keep pace with anyone with the weapons we have. We just didn't execute. I mean, I don't want to play that game, but, I mean, if you look at the Detroit game, we have a couple things different in the first half, and we could have been up by 2 touchdowns, I mean, easily. It didn't happen, and that's the way it played out. But, I mean, I think we can hang with anybody. So I think if we come out and have a good offensive showing, our defense will keep us in it. I do believe it'll be a close game, though. I mean, like most playoff games are. So, I mean, I think the Vikings win, by maybe 3 or 4 points. So I think it'll be a close game, but I think we can pull it out.
All right. So, well, he's Dr. Austin Crowe, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine inside the training room. Have a happy football weekend starting tonight there, big guy. We appreciate you taking some time this morning, and we'll catch up with you again soon.
Sounds good. You guys have a good weekend, too.